Hey everybody, welcome to SideQuest, the fourth panel, where I get into and describe the stuff that's behind the scenes of SideQuest, whether it's the creation of the comics, funny stories behind the comics, stuff that got cut out of the comics, or just, things that were interesting that happened during the creation. Let's jump into May's comics. Now, May, I slowed down a little bit. I was producing, I didn't really have a plan in April, it was just make a bunch of comics. Figured it would just stop, in April I would quit. But I liked making them. I had friends that had been, old readers of the comic, old readers of the comic. Need some water. Jesus. So I had friends that were longtime readers of the comic, comment and be like, "Hey, the stuff that you're doing is great. Keep it up." And what started as just me with some nervous energy, trying to get something out there, was kind of a thing, and I wanted to keep doing it. So May starts with Quarantine 23. This was supposed to be a longer story arc. You can really see the unkemptness of the character starting to come out. I wanted it to be kind of a gradual progression of them to be hairier and hairier and grayer and just kind of weird. Don't know where that's going to end. We'll figure it out though. But this is about Streets of Rage 4. I did not have a Sega. I had a Game Gear growing up, but didn't have Sega, like a Genesis or anything, or Master System. And but I had, once I got a Dreamcast, I got the Sega Collections or whatever it's called, and got to experience Streets of Rage 2. Fantastic game. Listened to a lot of podcasts about the history of it, and it's a wonderful game. You need to, I'm sure, Retronauts and some really reputable video game sites and podcasts will rub my eye. Don't touch your face, fucker. What are you doing? All right, and some reputable podcasts will, tell you more. I don't want to sully its good name by me trying to describe it off the cuff, but it's a fantastic game. I followed the creation of Street Rage 4 pretty closely on Nintendo Life, and just the art style, and then love 2D beat 'em ups or side-scrolling beat 'em ups. And this was like a great way to bring like a classic game that these guys would have grown up with back into the future. Do a cool comic about it, because we were doing a lot of slice of life real stuff, and it's like, well, this is at the core, this is a nerd comic about video games and nerdy shit. And I don't think I talk about Sega enough. So it was a really cool opportunity to kind of hit those, kind of check those boxes. And fantastic game. Still haven't finished it. I haven't really played a lot of games in a while, which is kind of a bad thing to say, admit, in a video game webcomic. So this was supposed to be an origin story. So this is why I started creating this, wanted to do this show. So originally, this was written to be the part one of them talking about Streets of Rage, and then Jarv brings up that he doesn't know how to buy the pots, which was a real comment I said, and I said it off the cuff, and I go, "Oh my god, I sound like an old ass person. I don't know how to buy the pots." So, like I said in earlier episodes, the whole idea, ping, that's a comic. Sometimes it's like, ping, that's a line to put into a comic. I just don't have the comic yet. So I'll, in my little notebook, still haven't figured out where the zoom camera is. I'll write certain things down, like, this is a good line, save this. This is a good thing. Now it just needs, this is the nice crab cheese filling. It just needs the wonton wrapper. So that was a great analogy, by the way. And so yeah, so that was where am I at? What the hell am I doing? So originally this was supposed to be a series of comics. So it led into the second part of them talking about the console wars and us growing up in the era of like brand loyalty. And I'm going to yell at my good friend because an ad in the magazine sold me something. But it was a fun time. I'm glad it existed without the internet. You know what I mean? I think it's one of those weird things that you talk to someone our age that kind of lived through that playground mentality of like Sega, Nintendo, Sega kind of arguments, and we all kind of smile. And that was the innocent days of arguing over nonsense. And I think most people at the end of the day who really like video games, there's good games on every system, and you just want to play those games. You know what I mean? And at least that's what I hope, for people. So yeah, this part two is actually supposed to be the lead into um, an origin story of Paul and Polly and Jarv, because we never establish when they became friends or anything like that. They just accept that these two guys live together and constantly talk about video games. Um, we've gone back to high school. There's some old black and white comics with their hairs. I've done a lot of different characters through the ages with them. I think you see Paul a couple times as a kid, and then you see them in high school a few times. And I liked kind of having it in black and white. For some reason, in like the early 2000s, late 90s, a lot of independent movies, for cost sake or just style, would do things in black and white. So I always kind of like that idea of when you show them younger, it's actually older looking in a sense, you know what I mean? So it like goes back to, the high school or early college days. It's in black and white or styled a little bit differently. So, but yeah, this was supposed to be a starting point for that. But I also started to just do weekly again, and I didn't know if the readers would want a kind of origin story, and I couldn't get really punchlines into it to make it really interesting, and I thought of a kind of clever way to not have them as kids in the first comic, but I knew that they would have to be young at some point, and still didn't have an art table, didn't have a way to draw, and creating these characters takes a lot of time. So I knew taking that undertaking of, okay, now I got to make them as kids now, you know what I mean? So I kind of scrapped that idea. Who knows, maybe I might come back into a future comic. And it was really cool just to have them playing video games next to each other, which I don't think was in the comic for a really long time, of them just enjoying a co-op beat 'em up game. So the last comic in this story arc is actually the first in June, so we'll talk about that, even though it's a June comic. Talked about in an earlier episode about the way I'm doing the comic now. When I create something, I have it forever and I can keep using it. And so when I make something that takes a lot of time, not always, but it's nice to kind of use it again and again, because it kind of makes it worth it to spend an extra 2 hours, making something look really well, and then you can kind of, make a couple comics with it. And especially if the comics are good and it services the comic to do it. Like, I don't want to make I made 3 comics because I made this house, and the third comic is a piece of dog shit because I wanted to use my house again that I drew. But this first one goes into my brother referenced that real early on, because he's still in it. He's a firefighter. He's a first responder. He's in my sister-in-law. They're both on the front line, so they were in it. Like, we had the comfort of just staying home, where they had to work and deal with this. And he had said the comment of, it's like an RPG out there now. You're just trying to avoid encounters. And so I kept that in my mind for a while, and it never played really well in the comic as a word bubble, but it influenced Paul's first line of shopping has become weird mix of video game and a drug deal. A weird mix of a video game and a drug deal. And it's a longer way of saying like an RPG, but it's a more, like, if I say RPG, gamers, most people know what I'm talking about, but a lot of people don't. So I think having it like it's a mix between this, and those two visuals people can get. So I had underneath their masks, their faces are there. But this is a true story. First started wearing a mask. My beard was a lot longer than it is now, and it just was uncomfortable. It kept sliding around. I had this weird gross hair sticking out of the bottom and shit, and it was rubbing it. It's one of those things when you grow a beard out. It's weird when your beard touches your chest for the first time, and it's like you get used to it and whatever. But it was just like walking around, and it's just like I got like, where does the hair stop? It's like here, and it's in here now. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's why. And Dana helped me a lot with this because it was very clunky at the end. This because the Papa Squatch and a pair of plum smugglers look is definitely an improvement. It's basically the whole idea of that in the 80s, most of our fathers walked around in tidy whities in the house. All right. And then the whole, so this is another true, and it still happens with my smaller beard, but the whole idea of getting mask face. So you wear this mask, and then I love this like side, like comb over look that I did with Jarv, because the whole points are kind of like 2.5D for all the gamers out there. They're like kind of at like a little angle. And I thought that was just hilarious. And I actually brought his chin up because most men with beards have small chins. Not me. Yeah. So, yeah, but most guys with beards, a lot of us, we don't have the chin really. So we can kind of grow our own chin, you know? So that was what this one was about. And he looks just so sad with his little comb over beard and like confused eyes. This was also a turning point for writing when I was just like, it's just become make fun of Jarv comic. So I think after this point, I started having like spread the wealth. I mean, I've always been kind of when we wrote originally, it was very much like Jarv and Paulie are more like Cheech and Chong, where they're different but they're very similar. Like Jay and Silent, like the two man rhythm is usually straight guy and then like comedy guy, and like Dean Martin and fucking hey lady, what the hell, Dean Martin and like Jerry Lewis. So like animosity between them because Dean Martin, so he always wanted to break out, do some comedy. Um, Apparently, this is a history lesson of two man fucking comedy shows. But when we were creating Paulie and Jarv after us, there were certain things that we knew. I knew this was a Paulie comment, this was a Jarv comment. But we didn't want straight man comedy, you know what I mean? Which is a good rhythm, but it's a predictable rhythm too. And so we always kind of wrote to kind of give one or the other as long as it fit. Because a lot of times comics were written like, damn, that's a really funny thing, but it's not for this person. Someone else needs to say that, you know. And sometimes the side characters will say stuff, and it kind of fits good. Not that there's anything wrong with that structure. It's a comedy structure that's there because it works. You know what I mean? But it's also cool to kind of play with that too. And I say that they're like Cheech and Chong because Cheech and Chong are very similar. They have different flavors to the comedy, but they're not like they're both funny. They're both the straight man. They're both the comedy guy. They kind of just like it's like playing tennis, you know, where Jay and Silent Bob is baseball. Someone sets up the pitch, someone hits it, and then every once in a while the pitcher catches the ball and says something clever at the end of the movie. But so that was like a weird. Yeah, hopefully you guys like that. It's a really cool insight to the comic, and also Cheech and Chong was also how me and Paul in real life would tell if people were cool when you met them. It was like because we both had a radio class, and our teacher would always play the old radio Cheech and Chong. Me and my mom love a good Cheech and Chong film. This is one of those things that I talked about earlier. This is a funny comic. A lot of bubbles. But this is sort of the thing. It's always been when me and Paul would write together, when you're writing with your friend and you're making each other laugh, it's sort of hard to stop. You know what I mean? And one of the things with making comics and making something like this is knowing when to just move on. I don't think this is an either or. I like this comic. I needed to fill a week. It works. It's a good joke, but it's not the strongest of the three, I suppose. Because even it sort of fades off at the end. where it kind of like, and it's maybe like a subconscious or an intentional way. I mean, it's got good jokes. It's a good thing, but it doesn't have that like drumbeat of a 3 panel comic. Like setting something up, someone said something, and then boom, it ends. It's kind of like extra. It was good extra. It's like Thanksgiving dinner with the leftovers. They're good once. You know, you don't want to heat up turkey and mashed potatoes and stuffing and the gravy, and it's weird and gelatinous for some fucking reason a third time. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if this is a third time, but this is maybe a ham spread. Maybe it's the fucking ham spread of the comic, and I don't know. I mean, if you read them, let me know. I think it's a great way. It's kind of a great way to know. In my design life, it's easy to say, if this thing is not working for the design, like cut it. It's a less is more approach. But I think when you're creating content, sometimes you need the more is more. And I think this is where the more is more. I mean, it's funny, it's cool, but if I was making like a book, maybe that's a better way. Maybe we'll forget all the. I mean, maybe if it explains it well with my Thanksgiving analogy, but if I was making a book of the quarantine comics and I had a definite number of slots, this probably wouldn't make it. So that's probably a better way. But fuck it, I'm gonna keep the Thanksgiving one because that's fucking hilarious. If this is stuff that you like and you want to know more, if you want me to start talking about something different, let me know. And if you want to know technique and style, even in the old comics, if there's one that from the archives that you want me to talk about, hit me up. Like and subscribe. I want to get more content on SideQuest YouTube going. So, but if you like this, let me know. If there's a special comic you want me to talk about, let me know. If there's something about webcomics that you want to know, let me know. SideQuestComic.com. That's where you can find everything about the comic. We got our SideQuest comic on Instagram. We got a Facebook page, and now we're jumping into the YouTube.